Our guest today is Irving Weisdorf, who was a Jewish-Canadian businessman. He's a University of Toronto graduate in political science and economics. He's studied in Strasbourg at the Institut des Études Politiques and is president of the Mossad Freedom Foundation, a not-for-profit organization formed in 2015 to promote Canadian values, individual rights and responsibilities, equality before the law, freedom of speech, association and religion, respect for women, democracy and freedom, responsible environmentalism, and to fight violence, intimidation, and terror against innocent people anywhere in the world. Welcome, Irving. Glad to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Robert. Pleasure to be here.
Can you give us a synopsis, if you will, of your personal history, especially as it relates to the ongoing and seemingly never-ending conflict in the Middle East?
Well, my parents came from Poland, both of them between the wars. My father arrived in 1936. He was the only one of his family to come to Canada, and the about 23 members of our immediate family was slaughtered in the Holocaust. I grew up here in Toronto. I was born in Toronto. I was given birth in Toronto General Hospital. I went to school here, went to U of T, graduated in political science and economics with a year abroad in Strasbourg, as you mentioned. And I've lived in, my business is in Canada and the United States. I'm in the souvenir business, postcards and souvenirs, which I started just over 40 years ago from scratch, and happily have done well enough to still be continuing. And I spent 3 years in Israel. I went to Israel as a socialist and was interested in finding out what kibbutz life was, because kibbutz was sort of democratic socialism, true socialism. And of course, I went as well because I'm a Jew, raised as a Jew. I'm secular, have been for a long, long time, but came from a traditional family where we celebrated Jewish holidays. When my father was alive, we went to synagogue, and subsequently, I've raised two children, one of whom made Aliyah. That means he went to immigrate. He immigrated to Israel about 2 years ago. He's in Tel Aviv now, and being raised as a Jew, Israel has always been part of our life, of our ethos, of our connectivity to the world. Jews are not just being Jewish is not just about the religion, it's about peoplehood. And as a matter of fact, when Napoleon granted or emancipated the Jews, so to speak, it was on condition that they give up their peoplehood and just be Jews in terms of religion. The Jews who tried to assimilate in many countries, in Germany, we can think most recently, they presented themselves as Germans of the Jewish religion. They gave up their peoplehood in a sense. And then they found that the Germans didn't see them that way. The Germans saw them as Jews. In one of your previous broadcasts, you mentioned Wilhelm Marr, who founded the League of Anti-Semites. And and you asked the question, I don't know if this is appropriate or not, Robert, but I'm referring to your previous seminars, webinars. You asked the question, well, what is a Semite, and was that a misnomer? And it was, but not for Wilhelm Marr, because at that time the only Semites the Germans were involved in were the Jews, and there was a feeling, certainly among Wilhelm Marr, very interesting story. You could Google him, that he married 3 Jewish women consecutively, and ultimately became a bit of a Jew hater. I don't know if that had to do with his marriages, but I think he was a conflicted person. But in any case, he founded the League of Anti-Semites, and he coined the word he may have coined the word anti-Semites, which we still use today, and it's probably not a great term, but it certainly refers to Jews, and only to Jews.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I think that in common parlance, anti-Semitic, although it may not be technically accurate from a historical or linguistic point of view, certainly means anti-Jewish.
Yes, and now there's an organization that started a couple of years ago called End Jew Hatred, and the people who founded that felt anti-Semitism was time to start to move away from the term anti-Semitism and move and get something clearer. You might call it Judeophobia, depending on whether you think it's now phobia is used for all sorts of things. It doesn't necessarily mean fear of something that doesn't exist, but you could call it that. There's the idea or perception that Jews control the world, control banking, control commerce, control I don't know what else, the Liberal Party, Hollywood, and they do have great influence in Hollywood. Why they went to California, I don't know if it was for the weather or what, but they did do very, very well in Hollywood. They've done well. Jews, the very much like the Chinese. As growing up, we're expected to do the best we can do. I sent my 2 sons to karate class, and that was, be the best that you can be. And we grew up that way. And also, we learn Jews are literate, and that's part of the religious process, because they have to learn to read the Torah in order to become bar mitzvah. And becoming bar mitzvah means becoming a man, becoming responsible for your own deeds, and that requires reading, and it requires reading in a different language, and that means that we have to be literate. And there's a great stress on education and on working hard, and that is part of why Jews are successful, like the Chinese Canadians, if you see them. And my travels go to China from a business standpoint, and I'm quite amazed at the Chinese culture as far as the work ethic is concerned. And we see that in Canada, that Chinese Canadians are successful. They're not in the red lines. So I don't know if that's illuminating or not, but
well, it does speak to something that has always baffled me, but I have an answer to the question now. And that is that, I mean, I am not Jewish, right? I was raised in a Catholic family, although one would describe me now as a lapsed Catholic. So as an outsider to this whole thing, although not denying my background, I could never understand why anybody would be anti-Jewish. I say, what is it about Judaism that you detest so much? Not that I've ever really met an anti-Semite or virulent anti-Semite. And there's really no answer that I could see other than historically they may have been outliers because religion allowed usury, interest on loans, so they became the bankers. And also perhaps because of the phrase "the chosen people," which sounds to any outsider rather arrogant or hubris. So, I mean, other than that, that's a silly thing, because many
Well, not really.
religions,
It is and it isn't. Let me speak to those 2 points because
please,
I think they're interesting. Um, the the first point was
usury.
usury. Yes, so Jews became bankers because the Christians forced them into that, and the there was a great after Constantine took Rome into the Christian religion, and the Romans became Christians, and there were multiple synods. I have a book here actually. It's about this thick about Christian anti-Semitism. It started with Jews killed Christ. But ultimately, there were all sorts of limitations on what Jews could do in Christian lands. They could not own land, so they didn't become farmers. As a matter of fact, the kibbutzim that I mentioned in Israel, they were partly socialistic because the Jews just didn't know what to do there, and they had to bring in farming specialists to teach them. I was growing wheat and milking cows and milking goats, as a matter of fact, as well, making goat cheese. When I was there, I was in my early 20s. This was paradoxically a result of Christian limitations on what Jews could do over the years, and they entered banking. They had the benefit, as have other groups, where there were Jews in Germany, but there were also Jews in France, and there were also Jews elsewhere. And I think that may have, although I haven't studied that a bit of history, I think that may have worked in their favor. And but they hardly control the world because, as we know, and I've mentioned this to you before, the Holocaust, if Jews control the world, the Holocaust wouldn't have happened. I mean, that would just be, bizarre. But I understand your position, and I wanted to mention something about it. As a lapsed Irish Catholic, and I asked you whether you'd ever gone back to Ireland. You said no, and maybe you're not interested, and you wonder why would I go to Israel? So I don't know if all Irish feel like you, or you're part of the majority, part of the minority. But I think there is a connection, and I think Ireland the Irish are very much like the Jews. And look, when John Kennedy ran in 1960, and he was a Catholic. Forget about the Irish. He had two sins against him. One, and the Catholic. I recall the election. The Catholic issue was a big issue for a lot of people, and he won despite that. But Jews never become non-Jews in the eyes of the Jewish community. You can be a lapsed Jew, and in a sense I'm a secular Jew, but I'm still part of the Jewish people, and I'm still thought of in those terms. And so are Jews who even convert to another religion. They're still seen as part of the people who are misguided and gone the wrong way. But I hope that answers your questions.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on those things. But to me, it's not usury. It's not we are the chosen people. It's not that sense of community or being a one people. It's as Ayn Rand, a Jewess herself, of course, lapsed or secular. She herself said, something to the effect of, it is hatred of the good for being the good. And this is what I'm seeing. I saw a recent PragerU presentation by Stephen Harper, a man I know that you probably admire.
Yeah.
And in many respects, I did as well, but maybe not to the extent some others do. But he said at the end of it, why wouldn't I be a friend of Israel? And he laid out all of the accomplishments of Israel. And at the end, he says, the only reason I can think of why people would be against Israel is anti-Semitism. And I'm going, no, it's not simply that. To me, it is hatred of the good for being the good, because he just outlined all of the good elements of Israel since 1948 and its founding, or 47. And then he's surrounded by not just Arab Muslim Palestinians hating them, hating Israel and Jews, but throughout history, people have hated Jews. Not everybody, but history is replete with that kind of anti-Semitism. And so I'm just going to put it down as, like, I'm trying to identify what is it about Judaism. And of course, it is, as you mentioned, giving a good parallel to several Asian cultures. Japanese is another one. Korean is another one. Chinese, of course. And you see, for example, the riots and the violence in Harlem when Korean shop owners are making a go of it and successful in Harlem because they own the corner stores. They've carved out this niche in New York. And what do we see? This is not so much today as it was a couple of decades ago, but we saw the blacks in Harlem setting fire to their shops, harassing them. Why? Hatred of the good for being the good. And it doesn't matter about race or religion. It is simply success. We see it today when people decry capitalism. Why? Because capitalism is the system that has brought prosperity to the most number of people. It is hatred of the good for being the good. So whether or not Israel was run or owned or controlled by Jews, it is a success story against all odds, and some people hate that. That's my estimation. What do you think?
I think you're onto something, and it could be said in different ways, but I think that's basically it. Yeah. And I'm going to say something that may be a little controversial now, but there's a few people have commented. I forget who originally did. I think it was a German journalist or politician, and said Germany has traded its Jews for an Arab underclass. And I thought about that, and are they happy with that trade? The Jews were competitive with the Germans in a sense. I mean, as I said before, the German Jews held the highest ranks. Even the poet laureate of Germany at one time, Heinrich Heine, was a Jew, which is amazing when you think of it. But there may be a preference for not having that competition, because when somebody is too, or when a group is seen as good, as you put it very well, then they may be hated, disliked, or whatever. I did want to come back to your chosen people question.
Oh yes, yeah.
And that is, there's a story, and I wouldn't say it's necessarily true, but there's a story that when God was deciding who to choose as his people, he went to various peoples, and he presented the laws, the commandments, and all the things that they would have to do. And he approached people X, and people X said, no, that's too tough. We don't want that. And people Y said the same thing. And the next people he went to said, same thing. And the Jews accepted it. I can't tell you why. And that's what, so the chosenness has, I think, been misinterpreted as chosen because we are better than everyone else. No, that's not what we were chosen to carry the word of God, to carry the idea of the Sabbath. I just imagine before the Ten Commandments were handed down, and ultimately Christianity through Jesus accepted the Ten Commandments. Most of the world worked 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. There were no days off. So Judaism has given us, and I wasn't there to do it, so I'm not taking any credit. But Judaism has, and Judeo-Christian values, and I think it's a fair way to refer to them, have given us many ideas, many concepts, and that's what our role is as the chosen people, to bring these concepts to the world. And we're not chosen because we're better. Clearly, when someone once told me, if there's a law on the books against murder, that's because people are committing murder. And if there's a law against theft, people are committing theft. And if there's a law against adultery, people are committing adultery. So the Ten Commandments, in a way, show that the Jews who received them were not perfect by any means.
I think it's time that I bring up at least Theodore Herzl, because I want to get into him in a little bit of detail. He wrote the book, now, the glare on the, here we go,
Yes.
The Jewish State by Theodore Herzl, or in the original German, Der Judenstaat, who back in 1892, I think, wrote, the Jewish state, which he's considered one of the intellectual founding fathers, if you will, of the state of Israel. And he died long before, of course, it came to fruition. But there's something here I want to quote to you and get your opinion on. And it deals with, I object to tribalism, at least in a political concept. Everybody loves to be around people who share their values and views and history. That's a fact of nature, right? We all love to congregate with people who share the same points of view. But let me just quote you this. And Herzl is saying, however much I may worship individuality, I do not regret its disappearance. Whatever is unfit to survive can, will, and must be destroyed. But the distinctive nationality of Jews neither can, will, nor must be destroyed. It cannot be destroyed because external enemies consolidate it. It will not be destroyed. It has shown during 2,000 years of appalling suffering. So when I think of, he's actually addressing the arguments against establishing a Jewish state. And one of the arguments against it is that it is tribalistic. You're going to give up your individuality to be amongst people, of a tribe. So he's willing to do that. What are your thoughts on that?
I need to start by saying that I'm not an authority on Herzl. Herzl was, as you probably know, he was not a religious Jew. He was came from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, where Jewish assimilation was very successful and very effective. And he was an assimilated Jew, and he had his eyes opened by the Dreyfus affair, where despite emancipation, Dreyfus was mischarged and not discharged, but mischarged and sent to and was convicted and was serving and served I think a couple of years of the penalty before it was overturned. And that sort of woke Herzl up to the fact that Jews will never be he felt Jews will never be entirely safe in a non-Jewish country. And I would have, before October 7th, I would have said he was wrong. And since October 7th and seeing what's happening in Canada, he may have been right. I don't know. I haven't given up on Canada, obviously, but seeing what's happening here in the United States, where we thought freedom and democracy would rule forever, and the universities, just unbelievable. So I can't tell you what Herzl was actually thinking, but Herzl wasn't the first Zionist. Herzl was the most famous Zionist, but Jews have been Zionists, well, probably before Jesus' time. Certainly Jesus would have been a Zionist. Jesus lived in Judea. He lived in Bethlehem. He was born in Bethlehem.
He was a Jew.
He was a Jew, and what Herzl had in mind when he wrote Der Judenstaat, I'm not 100% sure, and can't really say any more than that. But in terms of individuality versus having, I'm not sure that I see the connection. I don't see the contradiction between individuality and having, we'll say, a Jewish country as opposed to a Christian country. I always viewed Canada as a Christian country. More recently, we've talked about Judeo-Christian, recognizing the Jewish roots of a lot of Christianity. And so I don't know that there's a contradiction. Jews, they say, if you have two Jews in a room, you have three opinions. There's a lot of individuality in Jewish communities, and so I'm not sure that I would that there is a contradiction. We just finished celebrating the historical event of Hanukkah, which was basically the Jewish revolt against the Greeks, when the Greeks who had been diverse who had accepted diversity in most of their empire. Suddenly there was a Greek emperor who wanted to convert the Jews and the Jewish temple to Greek gods, to worshiping Greek gods. Now, that was in 167 BC. So Jesus almost assuredly celebrated Hanukkah. Hanukkah was celebrated. I mean, the Maccabean revolt led to the Hasmonean Jewish dynasty, which lasted many years. And Jesus, just as he celebrated Passover, and we know that because the Last Supper is understood to be the Passover meal, traditional Passover meal. Jesus celebrated Hanukkah. Now, when did the Arabs arrive in Jerusalem? The Arabs arrived in Jerusalem after Muhammad's death and conquered Jerusalem in 638. 638, that's 638 years after Jesus was born. And yet they have the audacity to say Jesus was a Palestinian. Now, what in the world does that mean? Conversion of the infidel is the main goal of Islam. Islam came out of Arabia, what is now Saudi Arabia, and moved both east and west. As it moved west, it not only conquered Israel, it also conquered all of North Africa, much of South Africa. There are Muslims throughout Africa, and to be honest, the Muslims, the slave trade, I've read several books where Muslim traders were bringing were bringing Black Africans to the shores for British ships to pick up and take to North America. So the Muslims were very deep into the slave trade. But if you look at what are the countries, I mean, Algeria, Libya, Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, these are all Muslim countries today, but they weren't Muslim countries in Jesus' time. When I studied in France, I had a fellow in my class who was a Berber, identified as a Berber from Algeria. Now, the Berbers were Algerian. They weren't Arabs. They weren't Arabs. Now it's Arab dominated and of course Muslim dominated. So the Christians colonized North and South America, not just a little bit in Africa as well and so forth, but largely North and South America were colonized by Christians, starting with Columbus. The Middle East and even the Uyghurs, the Chinese Uyghurs, who converted them? They were converted by Muslims. Pakistan and India, the Muslims in India were of course converted by Arabs who came and left their mark. So there is an occupation, but the occupation of Judea, and I hope I don't have to say, but I'll say it anyways. The Jews came from Judea, the Arabs came from Arabia. Now, you don't have to be a university graduate to understand that. As a matter of fact, if you are a university graduate, recently graduated, you may not understand it. But that is in fact the case. So who are the occupiers of, we'll call it Palestine, which is so much in the news today? And what is Palestine? And I would love to get into that if we have time.
We have all the time in the world, but just to put it in a nutshell, if I could, not to limit the conversation, but of course Palestine was given to the area by the Romans. I think it became a bastardization of the word Philistine, who are mostly the people around where the Gaza Strip is today, and they used that term. I think it was Herod. King Herod, I'm not too sure.
No, it was after Herod.
Was it after Herod?
It's okay.
Well, one of these Roman rulers,
one of the emperors.
Yes, one of the emperors changed the name of Judea, because of course it was referencing Jews, to Palestine as an affront to them and the religion for not willing to accept the rule of Rome. Is that not correct?
Yes, there was something called the Bar Kokhba. That was the leader's name. Bar means son of.
Hadrian. It was Hadrian, wasn't it?
It was Hadrian, yes.
Yes, okay.
He led a revolt, and the Romans. Some historians say now that the Romans changed the name to Palestine so that the world would forget that Jews ever existed. So Palestine is an area on both sides of the Jordan. There is a historical, I mean, if you said to me, well, what right do you as a Jew, or does your son as a Canadian Jew born in Canada, what right does he have to go back to Israel, what's now Israel? And in the area called Palestine, the exact borders have been disputed, but nobody disputes that it includes the land that Jordan is on now, the Kingdom of Jordan, which was the Hashemite. It was called Transjordan. So let's talk about the legal side. I mean, we could start with historically, and historically, I mentioned Jesus. with great respect. But Jewish history in the land did not start with the Maccabees. The Maccabees, 167 BC. The temple was built approximately by King Solomon. King David and King Solomon were about 1,000 years before Jesus. And it's estimated, and of course, we have the sojourn in Egypt, the slavery coming back. It's estimated that Abraham left, I guess, what was Babylon or Iraq, Mesopotamia, around 1800 BC. You could give or take 100 years without any problems, right? So Jews have a connection to the land, and you may say, well, some of this is myth, and very possibly some of it is myth, but there is proof. There is Egyptian proof that the Jews were actually slaves in Egypt, and that they left, and there because Judaism depends so much on the written word, as mentioned before. We know there's history, and we have kings and prophets and so forth. There is no Arab history that predates Judaism in what Hadrian called Palestine, and this would be, I was thinking about it yesterday, actually, and I don't know if this is a good analogy, but this would be something like a Canadian Indigenous person who lived in France and England and wherever in China, but then ultimately wants to come back to Canada to his reserve. And we are well, I wasn't descendant of the conquerors, but you might be. You could say that there is a white occupation of indigenous land, but if you go through the world, there is an occupation everywhere, right? But the real occupation in Israel is the Arab occupation. If we can venture into the legal side, we know that the Second World War ended in 1918.
First World War.
The First World War ended in 1918. And Peace of Paris was in 1919, talked about peace. In 1920, there was already discussion of the mandate system. And the mandate,
San Remo, yeah.
This was the self-determination of nations became the magic pill, in a sense, to prevent another world war. And the First World War was devastating. So the colonies or the empire of the Ottoman Turks was divided, and of the Germans and of the Japanese. There were three groups. Was divided among various Western countries to help them achieve nationhood. And the mandate for Palestine, and that's both sides of the Jordan. And I'm stressing this because most people don't know that the Kingdom of Jordan is, in fact, Palestine. In fact, it's 3/4 of Palestine. Now, you could argue it's only 2/3, but it's definitely more than half of Palestine. And Palestine was set aside for the Jewish people by the world the winners of the war.
Let me if I could interject one bit here, Irving, and maybe to play devil's advocate, because there's two interpretations of the San Remo Conference in 1920, which I think you are referring to. And that is when they say that there is to be set aside in Palestine a nation state for Israel, for Jews. Some people are interpreting in Palestine, well, I guess you are here, please correct me if I'm wrong, as meaning all of Palestine, while some people were saying that, well, no, what they meant was somewhere in Palestine, there should be a nation state for Jews. Care to comment?
The mandate accepted the Balfour Declaration, word for word.
Dear Lord Rothschild,
Yes.
I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionism aspirations, which has been submitted to me and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's government's view with favor on the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. And it goes on from there, but I think that's the interpretation.
Okay, that's very interesting. Let's put a pin in that, because I don't really, I've never heard the argument from that point of view that well, read the rest of it, because the rest of it, I think, clarifies it.
Sure. National home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. It is being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. So I don't think it clarifies it very much. Actually, in fact, what it does is sets aside the rights and civil and religious rights of everybody else in Palestine.
How I would read it or understand it is that there is no other state mentioned to be in Palestine. As a matter of fact, not only is no other state mentioned, there is no state for the Arabs of Palestine. It's specifically, it refers to the civil rights of any other inhabitants. So it precludes, in a sense, I would say, it precludes any other state from being created there, because it doesn't say in any other state the Jews will have civil and religious rights. It doesn't. No. So I would say that is why we generally interpret it to mean only one state, and that would be the state of the Jewish people. It was written by a Christian Zionist, and there was never any other entity. No other people lived there. No people, as in quotes. There were all sorts of individuals who had come there. And but I've never heard that raised. But I think the fact that no other state is mentioned, one could reasonably infer that it was only a Jewish state that was perceived. That would be my answer.
I'm as far as a legal scholar on this issue as you can possibly get, so I will not badger that point. Except to say one thing, which I would like your observation on, is that this is 1920, this is League of Nations, this is before World War II. Since then...
Since when?
Since the time of San Remo, since the time of the Balfour in 1917. Since then, the United Nations, post-World War II, set up a commission to determine what the boundaries of this new state of Israel should be. And in 1947, they determined that, okay, these are the boundaries that we're talking about. All in favor say aye, and the majority of delegates to the United Nations said aye. No Arab country did, but that doesn't matter. They're part of the United Nations, so they should live by the resolution 181. So regardless or notwithstanding Balfour, San Remo, everything that happened up to that point, The legal point is that the boundaries of Israel were set out, which did not include Judea, Samaria, or what people call the West Bank. So, and Gaza, it didn't include Gaza. As a matter of fact, it didn't even include a bit of Tel Aviv, I think, which was set aside as an Arab plot as well. So the legal history of this is fascinating, but I don't know.
Let me speak to that.
Sure, please.
181 was a United Nations General Assembly motion. It has no legal standing. It's a suggestion. Between 1923, the mandate for Palestine was officially approved by the League of Nations, and in that, and in this copy, you will see that it also spoke specifically to the territory known as Transjordan, which was now being separated from Palestine and given to Hashemites who had no, they weren't part of the landscape. They were brought in by Britain to as a thank you to the Hashemites for their whatever they did during the war. Abdullah was brought in. Abdullah had no connection to the land, and so it became a Bedouin kingdom. And the truth is that Jordan is Palestine, that 75 to 85% of the occupants are Palestinian. I mean, Jordan is what Hadrian called Palestine. It's on the land that Hadrian called Palestine. It's on the land that was envisioned, whether it was ultimately finalized or not. It was envisioned in the mandate for Palestine as being part of the homeland of the Jewish people. People, and I'm saying this because I'm thinking, okay, what everyone's talking about, what is the next step? What's the future? What is the solution? And that's the most, and this is seems like a million miles away to arrive there. But we know that India had enormous problems between Hindus and Muslims, and ultimately there was a division, and ultimately millions of people moved. Hindus moved to India, Muslims moved to Pakistan. There are still Hindus in Pakistan and Muslims in India, but the fact is that there was a transfer of populations. And maybe that's what should have happened. Maybe that still could be the solution, because I don't see what the solution in Gaza is. It is not a question of land. It is a religious question for Muslims, and we could, and I don't want to divide Muslims into the good Muslims and the bad Muslims. I don't like that at all. But there are the fundamentalist Muslims and the Muslims who just want to get on with their day-to-day life. Fundamentalism is still a very, very large segment of the Muslim population, as my good friend Rahil Raza, who is a Muslim from Pakistan, has pointed out in an excellent video called "By the Numbers." So there's a concept of the Waqf. I don't know if you're familiar with that concept.
Only marginally, as a designation of land which cannot be taken back.
Yeah, I have a little pamphlet here called 25 Years After Oslo, The Elephant in the Room. The elephant in the room is the Waqf. And the Waqf believes that any, and I'm going to read this if I may, the Palestinian Arab position has been confirmed by the top Palestinian religious figures who corroborated that all of Palestine, now all is in capital letters, all of Palestine is a holy Islamic Waqf an inalienable religious endowment under Islamic Sharia law. And therefore it is prohibited to give up even a millimeter of it. And that's the problem, that once land has been conquered in Islamic theology, I hope I express it correctly. Once land has been conquered, it is to be considered an Islamic waqf, W-A-Q-F. It is held for posterity until the end of time. The Hamas covenant, and I have that in English. This is the law governing the land of Palestine in the Islamic Sharia law. And the same goes for any land the Muslims have conquered by force. Because during the times of Islamic conquests, the Muslims consecrated these lands to Muslim generations until the Day of Judgment. So fundamentalist Muslims still want to reconquer Spain. I'm not telling you anything that an imam will not corroborate. It's to be consecrated for Muslim generations until Judgment Day, and that's the problem. So that's why I believe, because I can only guess, that's why the 5 times that the Palestinian Arabs, Yasser Arafat, Mahmoud Abbas, have been offered a state, they've rejected it. They rejected the state that you mentioned in Resolution 181, the UNGA resolution. They rejected it. Because they didn't want it. They want it all. They don't want a Jewish or a Christian or a Buddhist or hegemony on anything that was once Islamic. Even though the Muslims, as I say, the Muslims came in 638. Nobody will dispute that. And this is like 1,600 years after the Jewish temple was built, the first Jewish temple. So I think that's the problem. I think that's where we are today, and that's the problem. But there's never been a Palestinian state, a Palestinian Arab state. Palestine has never been the name of a country, and it still isn't. And that is the issue. So Gaza. What happened on October the 7th, that is the modus operandi. And I say this very thoughtfully. That's the modus operandi of Islamic conquests, conquest by the sword. And you'll see some Islamic countries, the sword is on their flag.
Let's move on to a question that's been bugging me as well, and we've referred to it earlier before, and that is, why after the Second World War, with the atrocities that took place there, you had millions, literally millions, of Jews leaving Europe, I think it was about 2 million, going to countries, mostly the United States, where they could practice their religion in peace, because the United States guarantees that in their constitution. Yes, you're going to get skirmishes, you're going to get pockets of anti-Semitism here and there, but the law of the land is you can be whatever religion you want, you can live in peace here in this country. And the majority of the Jews from Europe went there to practice their religion in peace. Why would a smaller number go to Palestine, and try to eke out a living in that desert, which, by the way, they made bloom, try to eke out a living in that desert surrounded by a people which did not particularly like them? Why would they? Do they love do they love this kind of conflict, or what is it?
Well, it didn't start out as a conflict, and there was no reason for a conflict. They bought land legally under Turkish law while Turkey controlled Palestine. And they moved there because that is the land of their forefathers. Now, you having not being not just a lapsed Catholic, but a lapsed Irishman won't have a feel for that, maybe.
Well, I mean, my people came from Ireland
Right.
basically around the time of the Great Famine,
Yeah,
1847,
potato famine, yeah.
1850. But I have absolutely no desire to go back to Ireland to reclaim and call myself a refugee of the potato famine.
Well, you wouldn't have to call yourself a refugee. Now, you also have to understand that the British didn't let Jews into the country. So when Jews could have left Germany, and the final solution was exactly that. It was not the original solution. The original solution was to get the Jews out of Europe, out of Germany, out of the German-controlled countries. But Britain, to its discredit, limited Jewish immigration to Palestine, and they had an obligation under the mandate, because they were the mandatory power. They had an obligation under the mandate to permit close Jewish settlement. Those are the words, and they didn't. So a lot of Jews simply ended up in Auschwitz and Dachau and Bergen-Belsen. So there could have been millions more there. And not every Irishman wants to live in Ireland, and not every Jew wants to live in Israel. That's okay. I mean, we don't say Ireland should become something else. Why should we say Israel should not exist? Should we say Ireland should not exist? I don't think so. We're not homogeneous in that sense. I don't think any people are. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but I think you raise it authentically, and so I don't think it's a false flag, so to speak. But it could be raised as a false flag and say, well, that proves that Jews have no real connection to Israel. But we know that, anyone who's had any Christian or read any Christian text or knows the story, the story of Jesus, that where was the manger? The manger was in Bethlehem, in the West Bank, if you want, in Judea. So the Arabs
under Roman rule.
Under Roman rule, exactly. So the Arabs have never had a stake there, because the Arabs have never thought of themselves in terms of countries and in that way. The Arabs, the Muslims, belong to the Muslim Ummah, which is the peoplehood of Muslims, if you want. I may not be saying that in the best, using the best phrases, but that's the idea, that there was never a Palestinian Arab entity. If there is, tell me who the rulers were. Tell me who the prime ministers were. Show me a coin from that era. There never was. They don't have that connection. And the Al-Aqsa Mosque connection is somewhat made up as well, to be honest. Al-Aqsa means the furthest away. I heard a great lecture about Al-Aqsa. Mecca and Medina are the focal points of Islam. But there were times when there were internecine battles between the Sunni and the Shia after Muhammad, and the Al-Aqsa was its reputation was elevated in order to satisfy certain political situations by certain parties in the Muslim Ummah. But there is no mention of Jerusalem in the Quran, and I think there are hundreds. Jerusalem is mentioned hundreds of times in the Torah. That's the connection. It's not perfect. It's not 100%, but you also can't say it doesn't exist. And I know Irishmen who do go back to Ireland and they love it. So, and it's something. It's interesting. And I, as I said, as you pointed out, I lived in Israel for 3 years, and I came back to Canada. I didn't find my place there. I gave up on socialism, uh, which was half of why I went there. Um, and one can be a Jew in the diaspora, and I love Canada, and it's a great country. Uh, at least it was until Trudeau came to power. So
Let's talk about that, because I'm perplexed in a sense. Well, not really, but I mean, it struck me as odd that in concert, every single Western leader came down on the side of Israel after October 7th, or I should say on October 7th, which was early in the morning. Apparently, then on October the 8th, the rhetoric subsided a bit when all of these Palestinian pro-Hamas, pro-terrorists people hit the streets and the university campuses. And then you saw Trudeau backtrack and then try to sit on both sides of the fence at the same time. What is your impression, if we could talk about October 7th for a moment, what is your impression of the West's response to the atrocities, realizing, of course, that there is a fog of war? I know that there are things that are disputable as far as details here and there, but I think we can both agree on the general story and narrative, and that is that on October 7th, over 1,000 Hamas terrorists, not soldiers, terrorists, invaded Israel and committed absolute war crime atrocities. And I almost don't want to use the word war crime, because that's usually associated with a state. And Gaza is not a state, and Hamas are not soldiers. So what is your response to the response from our countries?
it was very disappointing. Listen, there's always been a sort of quiet, growing up here, there's quiet anti-Semitism. And nobody was calling for the mass murder of Canadian Jews. So I don't want my comment to be misinterpreted. But there was sort of an underlying anti-Semitism that came from, I don't know where. It could have come from early Christian anti-Semitism. But for the most part, like, I'm Canadian. I feel Canadian when certainly when I'm traveling, I'm Canadian. I'm seen as Canadian. But Trudeau, I don't have a great deal of respect for Trudeau, I must say. So I'm going to be honest. I haven't always been a conservative, but I have been for quite some time. A Conservative Party conservative. Trudeau, you could ask the same question: why is Trudeau permitting so much immigration, and permitting immigration from places whose immigrants are not likely to hold the same values as Canadian values? And I don't understand it, other than he sees these people as future votes. I don't understand why they would do it.
Could I interject and perhaps offer an explanation the way I see it? And that is that, again, these globalists, these posers as leaders of nation states here in the West hate, oikophobia is the word, a hatred of your own house, a hatred of your own nation, a hatred of the good for being the good. Canada was good for all its faults. Same with the United States, for all its faults, and it has many, as an exemplar of good in the world of nation states. So we saw these globalists, these leftists, these progressives, these narcissists, these nihilists, get out your thesaurus, whatever you want to call them. These people are not good people. They're evil people. They want to destroy the good because it is good. Canada was good, and to some degree it still is, though they're trying their darndest to destroy it by allowing immigration, massive unvetted immigration of people, as you say, who do not share those values that made Canada and the United States good places to live. This is not to disparage those people who are coming in, of course, who do agree with our values, and there are many. But in general, I would say that this immigration, massive as it is, especially in the southern border of the United States, is by design to destroy their respective countries, Canada and the United States, and in Europe as well. It is a deliberate destruction of the West for being good. My
Yeah,
thought.
it's very sad. I read yesterday that Germany brought in 1 million refugees from Syria. Now, Germany has a certain, let's say, pain in its heart for what happened in the Second World War. And they're trying to compensate for that. And I think they overcompensate. They also felt that they wanted, and this is from conversations with German friends. I spent some time in Germany. And they felt that nationalism had gone wild, and they wanted to almost destroy the concept of a nation state, which they in fact have almost succeeded in doing, to their detriment, because there was much good in Germany. So what we're seeing, and this makes me think of something else I wanted to mention. It's the education. These people aren't born bad, and whether they're of this religion or that religion or color, or they're not born bad, but they are raised and taught to hate the values that we cherish, because jihad, Jihad, for any of your listeners who haven't heard the word, jihad is part of their faith. Jihad is world conquest. It's part of their faith. And we don't want to think that. We project our own values onto other people. How can people not want to live in peace? How can people not want their children to grow up and be healthy and successful and also live in peace? But there are concepts where sadly in Islam, where being a martyr is a good thing. I have a very good friend of many years, 50 years actually. I'm starting to get old, I think. From Pakistan, from Lahore. And his name is Shahid. Well, the word Shahid can be interpreted in a few different ways, but Shahid means martyr. And for a girl, the name is Shahida. It means martyr. Now, who in Christianity or in Judaism would name a child, give that kind of a name to it? That kind of a name doesn't exist in our culture.
Well, you could say that Jesus was a martyr, and many in the Latin countries, Jesus is a common name, but that's a stretch, I guess.
No, that's not the same, because if Jesus was a martyr, his parents didn't raise him to be a martyr. Correct. And that's what I'm saying, is that parents who would give the name Shahid to a child, to their own child, it boggles my mind, and maybe so this is so I come back to the fact that this is a religious issue. This is a religious war, and people in our country, sadly, in North America, don't want to talk about that. And to some extent, Islamophobia, the Islam, I'm sure I'll be labeled Islamophobic because of my comments, and I'm not. But that's the reality, and so the value system is very different. Now, I said I wanted to connect that to something, and that is United Nations has a refugee organization that works to help all refugees. But for some reason, it created a very special agency, UNRWA, and UNRWA runs the schools in Gaza. And the schools in Gaza teach, grade 3, if you have 10 Jews and you kill 4 of them, how many do you have left? This is what's taught. This is what's taught to grade 3s in these schools that Trudeau just sent more money for. And the UNRWA is connected to Hamas. It's the Hamas members run it, essentially. Everybody knows it. It's maybe not everybody, but everybody who takes a look at it. There's lots of, I can give you and your viewers lots of videos and so forth. The textbooks are taught to kill Jews, not hate Israelis. It's Jews, and to kill Jews. That's what they're taught, and we finance that. So that's why I say it's a real problem. The United Nations is part of the problem, not part of the solution. The real solution is a very difficult one. I think that Jews from the Islamic countries all had to flee in 1948. So there were 750, the estimate is about 750, 800,000 Jews left Iraq, left Morocco, left Algeria, left Libya, and so forth. They left Iraq. They had been there since the time of Cyrus the Great, since the Babylonian captivity. So they'd been there for well over 1,000 years. They had to flee. So there was a transfer of populations. Now, not unlike the transfer of populations, and interestingly, at roughly the same time between Pakistan and India. I think Pakistan and India is a good example of a potential solution. Maybe it's not the best one, but Israel accepted all these Jews. These are called the Mizrahi Jews, or the Eastern Jews from Arab lands. And so what would be so bad if the residents of Gaza were to move to either Egypt or Jordan, which are both nearby? They have relatives in Jordan. They're clans. They're still very clannish. The clans are in Jordan. And with Israeli financial help, American financial help, whatever, and this could start an industrial revolution in Jordan. That's one example. But I think we have to talk realistically. I don't think a United Nations solution is realistic. I don't think a one-state solution is realistic, because look what happened to, how many Christians are there in Lebanon? I can tell you how many. I know lots of Christians and Lebanese Christians in Canada. They all had to move because there was a civil war, because there was jihad, and that is what you get with when there is sadly a significant Muslim population that are fundamentalists. So I don't know if I answered your question.
You mentioned about being labeled as or as Islamophobic, right? Again, a word I disagree with, because there's no fairness necessarily.
It's not English. It's not good English.
No. But I see people being labeled when they criticize Benjamin Netanyahu or the tactics of Israel currently at post-October 7th, or even settling in the West Bank post-67 war. All of these criticisms of the political decisions of the Israeli government, people might lash out and say, well, you're anti-Semitic, you're an anti-Semite, you're anti-Jewish. When, of course, in my estimation, I think that all political action is fair game for comment and criticism. What are your thoughts on using that slur, which sounds to me just like the racist slur that leftists dole out, like there's no tomorrow. Like if you disagree with something, you're a racist.
Yeah,
your comments on that.
I agree with you, Robert. I think all political decisions are fair game, but they have to be also reasonable. So Benjamin Netanyahu, there's a movement among Israeli leftists, and it's supported by American leftists, both Jewish and not Jewish, to get rid of Benjamin Netanyahu, and we saw that in the few months. Actually, it was at least 6 months of demonstrations against judicial reform in Israel, and judicial reform, and the judicial reform bills, for the most part, would have brought Israel in line with Canada. They were very, and that's a topic to itself, but essentially they were very reasonable. But the goal of the leftists was to bring Netanyahu down. Netanyahu is not a right-wing crazy. He's, maybe a Pierre Poilievre. He's Stephen Harper. He was a great finance minister, and he actually talked about a two-state solution during Obama's period. But I think he's come to realize that the two-state solution would be an existential threat for Israel, and I don't think he stands by it today. But he's not, and there are also some people who are saying, well, he's doing all this because he's up on bribery charges. Well, the bribery charges are similar to the charges against some of the charges against Donald Trump, and that is,
bogus.
He accepted a bottle of wine from somebody, and this is right. I mean, they're ridiculous. They're ridiculous. One said he permitted a newspaper to be founded. I don't know all the details around it, but because and on the promise that he would get good coverage in the newspaper. Now, I mean, it's people don't like him because he's good. He was a brilliant Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, and he's one of the best that we've had, to be honest. And you can criticize him. I mean, criticizing the war, should there be a ceasefire or not? Well, would these same people have demonstrated against the United States bombing Dresden? Maybe. I mean, there were people who were just didn't believe that military action was good or not good. But and it's fair game. I don't think anyone's an anti-Semite for saying that this isn't the best way or that isn't the best way. But they should, before saying that, I would ask that they really investigate what they're talking about and know what they're talking about.
And by the same token, we should not label people as Islamophobic simply because we disagree with some of the political elements of certain Muslims. Certainly not all. No religion is monolithic.
No.
And so you had to be very specific. I find this all the time, and I've been criticized for it all the time, and speaking in generalities, like Jews are this, Muslims are this, Catholics are this, and then you get slammed for saying, well, I'm not like that, and I'm a Muslim, and I'm not like that, and I'm a Jew. So we have to be very careful and very specific. Otherwise, we do risk these labels, these smears coming out and this deflecting from the real debate.
Yes, and real debate's really important. And I think it's important because, for one thing, debate clarifies things for both sides, and that's really important. That's largely being lost. We don't have our newspapers now. They're either on one side or the other side. They're very, I can't think of a newspaper that actually will carry op-eds anymore, or does carry op-eds anymore, because you have to be left to get into the Star, and you have to be right to get into the National Post. And personally, I favor the National Post. I would say they're a little bit better, but someone might disagree with me. Yeah, I agree. And Islamophobia, yeah, I mean, I don't think we're fearful of Muslims. I think it's, how like when there have been demonstrations uh, in favor of Hamas, knowing what Hamas did, and like how is that possible in Canada? I just don't understand.
Ignorance. I saw a video of a person on the street, an elderly woman, well, elderly, 50s maybe, younger than me. So anyway, she was waving the Palestinian flag, saying, "From the nation to the sea." And a man goes up to her and says, "From the nation to the sea? What nation?" Oh no, from the mountains to the sea. Really? What mountains? This is almost literal. And then she goes, "From the river to the sea." That's it, from the river to the sea. And he goes, "What's the name of the river?" And she couldn't answer. This is what we're dealing with, I think, to a great degree. Certainly there are people who are pure evil, knows what Hamas did and supported.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. But I would say and venture to guess that the majority of everybody you're seeing on the street waving Hamas flags or having the scarf of Yasser Arafat and the PLO around their neck, or waving the Palestinian flag, or banner, I should say, considering it is not a nation, the Palestinian banner, have no idea where Palestine is, what the conflict is about, where the Jordan River is, the historical context of all of this that you and I have been discussing. They have no idea, and yet they're willing to go out there and try to push the political narrative in one direction out of pure ignorance. What do you think?
It must be, I guess, but there are some. Yeah, it's either ignorance or evil. I think those are the only two choices that you could have.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Just a small point, that there are people who are and these are like university students who are coming out and saying there never was a slaughter. It's all fake. And that's sort of the big lie. And it reminds me of Mahmoud Abbas, the PLO chairman, who some people are saying should take over Gaza. Mahmoud Abbas wrote his university thesis, and it was a Holocaust denial thesis. I didn't read it, but everybody knows that he wrote it. So if somebody denies the Holocaust or denies what happened on October 7th, and I'm sure some are just ignorant, but some are just evil, and the question is, can you make peace with those people? Goebbels, your older listeners will know who he was. Some of the younger ones might not be. He was the Nazi propaganda chief, and he is alleged to have said, the bigger the lie, the more likely it will be believed. Because everybody says small lies, but the big ones, like there was no Holocaust. Now, nobody would say that, and nobody in his right mind would say that if it wasn't true, right? So certain people believe it, and certain people believe that October the 7th never happened, that girls weren't raped, that babies didn't have their heads cut off or weren't burned in ovens and burned to death in ovens and so forth. It's frightening. It's frightening that Canada and the United States have people among us who would believe that didn't happen after all the obvious proof.
The video.
Yeah.
Despite the particulars, despite all of the particular instances, the 40 babies having their heads cut off, for example, people deny that. Oh yeah, where's your evidence? All this. Okay, despite those altogether, it happened, right? People died, civilians were targeted. It is, like I say, if it was a nation state, it was a war crime. So yeah, let's not get bogged down in particulars. Much like, the Holocaust did happen. Was it 6 million? Was it 5,999,999? Was it 6,000,007? Irrelevant. There was a Holocaust, right? And so all of these people saying, well, no, it didn't happen because you can't prove this particular. That's not reasonable. That's not rational. Any final comments then, Irving?
We have to get the public to understand that, first of all, Israel's not an apartheid state. I think it goes back to these sort of core lies that have been promulgated by what can only be called propaganda. Israel's not, anyone who lived during the time of South Africa understands that Israel's not an apartheid state. Israeli Arabs vote. They have candidates. There's an Arab on the Supreme Court. They're in all the hospitals. They get the same service, et cetera, as Jewish Israelis. So it's again one of the big lies. I call it an apartheid state, and that's such a big lie that people say, "Oh, it must be. Otherwise, why would anyone say that?" Well, it's not. It's not. Anyone with I think it was grade 6 history would know that Israel is not an apartheid state, and it's not an occupying power, and that's why I stress the point that we've been there for a long time. Is it fair to come back? We didn't talk about the fact that the Arabs, most of the Arabs who are now in Gaza or in the West Bank, actually are the descendants of recent immigrants to Israel, Palestine, West Bank. And you can tell by their names. If you, actually, an Arab Israeli mentioned this to me, that if you look at the names, there used to be a phone book. You could look at the names in the phone book. You have to do it a little bit differently now. But the name Al-Masri means the Egyptian. Now, you're not going to convince me that this guy didn't come, his family, not him, of course, didn't come from Egypt. Because I know Jews have a lot of Jews have names, and I'm sure non-Jews as well, Christians, have names that relate to where they come from. So these are not people who've been there, not even since the Arab conquest. If they're there from the Arab conquest, then that's an interesting question. If their families have lived there since 638, do they have less or more right than Jews, some of whose families lived there right through time, but who just came from Europe 100 years ago? It's a good question. It's a fair question. But the Israeli Arabs, the Arabs who are citizens of Israel, are not that unhappy. In reality, they have freedoms that they wouldn't have in any other Muslim country, whether it's whether they're women or homosexual or whatever. In Gaza, homosexuals are hung from cranes. So the Arabs in Israel are for the most part quite happy and content and are not demonstrating. But there is a segment run by Hamas, run by Iran. We didn't talk about Iran, but something has to be done about Iran. I appreciate your giving me the opportunity to chat. It's always a pleasure to chat with you, and I hope my comments are interesting to the audience, and I'd be happy to answer questions if they're forwarded to me in some fashion. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I do appreciate it, and it's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.